own sympathies are well, not quite opposite what Mario is defending, but still they go in a somewhat different direction. I'm more skeptical of nature. And so the title of this conference is Realism and Anti-Realism. And I would like to defend the anti-realism position in the face of the formidable assault on that position leveled by Mario. Well, I think scientific realism and anti-realism are two opposite intuitions that occur frequently among laymen, and so both occur frequently, both among scientists, philosophers, and laymen. And I think it's not far from the truth to say that there is a kind of consensus developing that this is a situation of a kind of eternal stalemate. So we cannot make any progress there. But there are new developments, and one of them is the second point that I mentioned there. That's the introduction of formal arguments having to do with the probability calculus. And well, Mario himself has made use of probabilistic ideas, so the ideas involving probability, chance. And the question is, will that end terminate the stalemate that we are facing in this discussion between realism and anti-realism? And to take away the tension, my conclusion will be that no, there will be no big progress made by probability theory. Actually, probability theory is a slippery subject, and we should be very cautious using it. It's very easy to fall in gaps and to go down a slippery slope. Well, let me see whether I succeed in getting the next. Yeah. So there are these two intuitions. So one says that science, well, perhaps I should reveal to you that when I use the word science, I come from physics myself. And so the first thing I think of is physics when I use this word science. And at least for physics, there is no discussion possible. I think physics has enormous success in predicting things and, governing things, making use of physical processes, also for applications. So physics has success, and more generally, science has success. Its success is enormous. The whole of society more or less relies on this success. At least important parts of society rely on the success of science. How is that possible? Well, it would be miraculous if that success was brought about, result has been found, without science latching on to the structure of reality itself. That's the first intuition. So, and I'll go into more detail about that intuition, the realist intuition, in a moment. Then there's the opposite intuition, which says that, well, there are so many possibilities for processes that they are able to reproduce the things that we observe. It's like curve fitting. So you know the problem of curve fitting, you see certain data points, and the question is, what's the function that governs, that goes through these points? Well, it's very simple to see that there are infinitely many functions that do the job, even of an infinity that's bigger than the infinity of the natural numbers. So it's, I don't know which level of technicality I can go to here, but it's a denumerable, non-denumerable infinity. And so it's the same in science. We make all these observations. They can be compared to data points, and we are looking for the theory that goes through all these observations. There must be innumerably many. Now there may be restrictions. Some forms of theories we don't like, others we do like. So there are theoretical virtues we should bring into play. But these are only a limited. These are of a limited number. These have a lower cardinality, to speak in such theoretical terms. And a simple reasoning shows you that still the number of remaining possibilities is enormous, infinite. And so it would, so the intuition that goes with this is that it would be an unbelievable lucky circumstance if he hit on exactly the right theory, if there is one. But I'm not going into that, so I'm going to stay on a rather superficial level. So it would be like hitting on the famous needle in a haystack if he found the truth. So that's the anti-realist intuition. That well, the best we can do in science is to come up with models more or less in the way Enzo proposed a moment ago. But it's almost impossible. It would be a miracle if he hit on the truth itself, if there is the truth itself. So that's the empirist side of the coin. Now go a little bit further. I announced that this in the beginning. These two intuitions play a role, sometimes even in the same persons. They're present even in the same persons. There's a famous folklore idea that that scientists, physicists in particular, are very pragmatic and are not after finding the truth. This is connected with the idea of shut up and calculate, saying that many of you will have heard. But I'm a physicist myself, and I know from experience that this is only a kind of first approximation. People are pragmatic, want to make calculations, want to come up with predictions. But most physicists are interested in the world as it is. But at the same time, they have a cautious attitude. You cannot be sure about what the world is like. And so these two things play against each other, are both present. Both intuitions are present. There are well-known debates in the history of science, like Planck versus Mach, Boltzmann versus Planck. One party defends the realist position, the other party is more of an empiricist kind. But if you really look into the details of these debates, then you see that both sides have sympathies that go in both directions. For instance, Planck defends the realist position, also at a certain point defends a Kantian point of view, a kind of idealist point of view. And the same with Boltzmann, who is also known as the realist, who defends the Bielder theory of Heinrich Hertz. So I'm not going into these details because these are side remarks. My point is that in these historical debates, even in the same persons, both camps are represented. So both intuitions are present even in the same persons. And I think Einstein hit the nail on its head when he wrote the famous statement by Einstein that the scientist is an opportunist. And well, depends on the circumstances, what serves the things that he's doing best, whether he takes a realist or an empiricist position. You could also ask the same question, whether you have realist sympathies or more empirical sympathies. You could ask the same question to the layman. And actually, I like this example. That has been done. So this is sociological work, and you can ask people, well, what do you think? In order to do science, if you to go after the truth, to give a scientific explanation, do the premises have to be true or not? This is not yet published, but it will be done at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. It's a bit informal because it's not been published yet. And then it turns out that opinions are divided. Something like 60% of the people say, oh yes, if there is a theory of which we know that it is false, like the Ptolemaic theory, it still is able to explain the motion of the planets that we can observe in the sky. 40% say, oh no, that cannot be done. Because in order to give a real explanation, you have to start from the truth, otherwise you have no explanation at all. But the opinions diverge during this point. And this is quite constant. It's a bit like half-half. Only one exception, that perhaps is nice to mention, that is that people were also asked whether the theory of creation compared to the theory of evolution can be considered to give an explanation of the creation, things like that. And at that point, only the scientific viewpoint came out as the one that was universally supported. Only very small minority thought that these things were of equal value. But these are all observations concerning, well, what people do in practical life. So they are of a sociological, perhaps psychological nature. And that, of course, is not what philosophy of science is about. We should turn to epistemology. And that's, and then we come back to what I already mentioned in the beginning. I announced that I'm going to face the realist position. So I'm going to investigate what argumentation on the realist side is. Now, there's one master argument used in epistemology for the realist position, and that's exactly what I, in intuitive terms, already mentioned a moment ago. It would be unbelievably improbable if a theory had not at least gotten a hold on part of the truth, if it produces all these nice and good predictions. So that's the no miracle argument. We don't want to accept miracles, so we have to accept that science latches on to the truth. And as Mario has emphasized, this argument seems extremely impressive, even if it's all about novel predictions. That was also mentioned by Enzo a moment ago. So you could imagine that the theory is good because it has been constructed in such a way that it fitted all the past observations. But that doesn't mean that it will also have success in the future. And so if such future success, unexpected success, is actually found, that seems to count very heavily for the truth value of scientific theories. Well, what's the structure of this argument? Well, it has to be a kind of probabilistic argument because it's completely clear. It was even mentioned by Enzo a moment ago in the previous talk that we cannot make use of a syllogism here. Because if a theory is true and then it follows that it's successful, suppose that that's valid. Even there are certain complications, but I don't want to go in there. But let's suppose that it is true, that it's a valid syllogism, that if a theory is true, then it will have then it will have predictive success. Then we cannot reverse the order of argument, of course. That's a well-known fallacy, known from the time of Aristotle. Even is it confirming the antecedent or something like that? Yeah. Oh, okay. So it's clearly a fallacy. So everyone understand that that's a fallacy. So, and it doesn't help if we give it a kind of posh name. So if you go and call it induction or abduction or inference through best explanation, that doesn't remove the fallacy. So in order to make this into something that's persuasive, we have to make it into something different from what a syllogism is. And here I've written down in words here. Well, the premises are that if a scientific theory is true or nearly true, on the relevant points. So we're going to be sophisticated. It doesn't need to be the whole truth. Then its success is guaranteed. So let's assume that. By contrast, if a theory is false, then making a true prediction, that would be, well, highly unlikely. Therefore, with some probability, we are justified in saying that if success is found, success really obtains, then the theory is true. That's the probabilistic version of the argument. But the way I've spoken about this, the way I'm speaking about that now, and I'm sorry to report that that's very often the way the philosophical literature speaks about the argument, it's still not convincing, as I will show you now. So I've written the argument out as a kind of formula. The important point is what the idea is, what's given here. It's more or less the same as what I said at the moment ago. So suppose that these are the premises, that the probability of success, you know, there, that's the conditional probability of success given T, the use of the theory. Suppose that's very high, cannot be higher than 1. So I've written it 1 minus epsilon, it's a very small number. I suppose that the probability of success given the falsity of the theory, so the denial of it being true, that's very small. I've used the same epsilon. And suppose also that S is actually found, S obtains, so the success is there, denial. Then the argument, as I reported about it a moment ago, says, the conclusion of these terms, that the probability that the theory is true, given its success, is almost 1. That's what I will now do. So we can almost be certain of the success. I think Alberto in his comments a moment ago spoke about a calculation which supports the no-miracle argument, and then it must be a calculation of this kind. But this actually is a policy, and it's the same kind of policy as in as we have in the syllogism. What is it called? Confirming the concept. Confirming the concept. Aha. Okay. So that's it commits a fallacy. I'm not being very original here. This has been remarked before, which is known as the base rate fallacy. And it seems that in this context, that this fallacy has first been noted by Colin Housen around year 2000. I've not checked this. Stefan Hartmann told me about this a couple of months ago. And actually, I find that quite amazing, because it's a well-known fallacy. You can find it in all textbooks of statistics. Personal note: my sister studied psychology long ago, and she had to make an exam in statistics. She found that a terrible subject, and because I did something with mathematics, physics, I had to help her. And so I came across all these things then, and that's long ago. that was before 2000. But okay, in the philosophy of science literature, this seems to be a kind of discovery. And well, the kind, what goes wrong here is more or less the same as what in the syllogism goes wrong. What we, perhaps I should give an example, because like this psychology, in the medical profession, mistakes of this kind are very often made. So suppose there's a very sensitive test for a certain illness. So nothing is ever really perfect. So suppose that if you're sick, you have this illness, then the test will say yes in 90% of the cases. Now you go to the doctor performs the test, and the test says yes. And now everyone, well, it's kind of intuitively actually thinks, oh, it's almost certain that this this person or himself have this illness. In fact, sick. That's more or less the same as what we just said in the case of the truth. So this theory has this success, and then it must be almost certain that it is good. But what you forget is that if the disease we are discussing is very infrequent, has a very low incidence of the population, then still the chance that you have this illness is very, very low. These are very basic remarks, actually. And so what we should do is well, be a little bit more sophisticated than what we have on the previous page. So we should write down full formula, the truth of the theory, given its success, and that full formula is. It is not it looks complicated, but it actually just the definition of the conditional probability is. And the important thing here is that it contains this prior probability of being true. That's this P here. So that's like the disease, the sickness that I was just discussing. If the incidence of the sickness is very low, if you think that that's the case, then the test doesn't need to be alarming. Here, if this number here is very low, well, then the probability that the theory is true, even if it gives a correct prediction, can be very low. Now, suppose it's zero. This is zero. Well, you don't have to be a mathematical genius to see that then this P given S, left-hand side, will always be zero, whatever evidence comes in, will always remain zero. Now think about an empiricist, one of the strict kind. Perhaps you would say a fanatic empiricist. Well, he or she, they will say, well, the probability that I've hit on, so the prior probability that I believe that the theory is true, how should I make a picture of that? How should I calculate that in the back of my mind? That must be something as 1 over the enormous number of possible theories that explain everything that is observed. And as I noted in the beginning, that will be 1 over infinity, probably even more than the infinity of the natural number. So that will be 0. So that kind of empiricist will not be convinced by this argument. On the other hand, if you're a realist, you think, well, that goes very far. I mean, taking the probability equal to 0, that's a kind of fanaticism. So one should allow a certain probability, a certain finite probability. Well, that brings me to my next slide. That doesn't help. At least that's what I'm saying. That doesn't help. So now I'm taking this probability as well a small number, epsilon, and I'm still in the formula. So if you look at the formula and do a little bit of thinking about it, then you will see that the posterior probability, so what comes out after the evidence has come in, will stay low if I take this epsilon small enough. And if you're an empiricist, you always will find an argument that this probability will in fact be very low. So an empiricist can insist no miracle argument. That's what I'm saying. Even if they accept that the probability of false theories with regard to predictions is very small. Because as I've written down there, if I take this epsilon be even smaller than that probability, the posterior probability will remain small. Now you still may be thinking, I suppose Mario will think that way, that if I have a theory and it produces novel predictions, one prediction after another, in very disparate fields, then the probability that that happens, given a false theory, becomes smaller. I'm not completely convinced by that argument, because I think it doesn't happen that much that so many predictions actually are made in completely disparate, so unequal to each other, disparate fields. And well, this is something to be discussed later. I think that in the practice of science, we only have a couple of experiments. I'm not speaking about repetitions of the same experiment or very similar experiments, but I'm speaking about the experiments that go in completely different directions and test theory in completely different ways. So I think that doesn't occur that much. But even if it does, I have another argument. It reminds me of a discussion I just had at a coffee that in philosophy, people often have an argument for a position, and then they say a couple of lines later, but if this argument doesn't convince you, I have another argument. It's a bit strange from a mathematical or physical point of view, because if you have an argument, then you have a proof for that it must be okay. So why should you have a fallback argument? I think there's an even deeper problem with the numerical argument. So this is one way, and so if you, this is one problem, and so if you are really convinced and persist, this will be sufficient for you, I think. But I want to go a little bit further. And I forget this. As I mentioned in a moment ago, this observation that I make about the policy that's involved in a very simple form of argument, that hasn't remained unobserved. Several people have tried to do something about it. And the way to go about this, to amend the argument so that it becomes valid, is to construct in some way or another a lower bound for this prior probability. So my argument of a moment ago is completely dependent on the idea that I could make the probability as low as I wanted. And then I can always make vanish the influence of the evidence that comes in. But suppose I cannot do that, so that there is a lower bound. Then the argument would become forceful. And a number of authors, Steven Wagner, Jan Springer, former colleagues of mine in the Netherlands, one now in Munich and the other in Torino, and Richard David, who has spoken here, I think, not so long ago. I saw that on Facebook. David, yeah, perhaps you pronounce it differently, Richard. David. He's done a lot of work on non-empirical support theories. Well, that's also a let me not go into that. So there are a number of research articles, and they consider various possibilities of indeed constructing such a lower bound of the probability. One idea, I think that goes back on David, is that well, if scientists have tried, have done their best to construct alternative theories, and they have done that for a very long time, and they have not come up with well, with a plausible candidate, then that seems to indicate that there are no alternatives, and so that you don't need to divide by an infinity, but there's only a small number of theories. But at least authors note themselves, there are lots of ways to explain the lack of alternatives. One of them is, I think that's an important point, that scientists don't feel the need to construct new theories if they have one in place. And then this you could connect with a kind of Kuhnian conservatism. There is a kind of paradigm, and by go outside the paradigm, you do your normal science, and you will not be appreciated by your colleagues if you say, oh, I want to find something else. And so they go into details. Also, if you want to make the calculations, you have to introduce all kinds of subjective probabilities. So the final conclusion reached by these authors is that you cannot estimate this probability in an objective way. And there's also a second proposal made, that you look at the history of science, you look at all the theories that were proposed, and how many of them were successful at all. And so Jan Sprenger considered the possibility of taking that number as a kind of estimate of the prior probability. But the problem with that is that you can only look at the empirical adequacy. It's another philosophical term. Instead of the truth, by going this way, because you look at all the theories that were proposed, you look at those from that set that had empirical success. And so how would you go from that number to the number of theories that were true? So that's the difficulty. And so these authors say that you cannot get further this way. So this is an open field. So quite some people are thinking about these things. I myself am not working at all in these kind of this field, and so I'm just reporting here. But now my own thought about this, and that is that there is something more basically wrong with the whole argument. Now I seem to have done something with it has got stuck. Even more fundamental doubt. That's what we are supposing all the time in making arguments of this kind. And I must say it's quite plausible intuitively, is that the probability that the theory comes up with the correct prediction, if the theory is false, that probability is very, very small. It's like this needle in a haystack. But let's suppose for a moment that that's not true. This is a kind of thought experiment. So let's suppose for a moment that the probability of success, given that the theory is false, is the same as the probability of success if the theory is true. Well, then you see again very easily that you can sketch out all these additional probabilities, and then what you are left with is this. This is PT, the prior probability. So the probability that the theory is true given this success is just the same as the prior probability. This means that evidence has played no, the success has played no role at all. So in other words, it's verifiable for the numerical argument that the probability that these probabilities, these conditional probabilities, are not equal to each other, and that the probability of success given the false theory is very small. And this seems quite reasonable. I have no idea what. No. So, but I think in the intuition something is going wrong here. because what's the intuition behind this idea that a false theory cannot lead to success? That's the idea that a false theory is a kind of heap, a stack of false statements that is completely rubbish. And then such a theory, of course, well, you can make it fit with everything that has come before. But how could it possibly make a correct prediction? But that's not fair to think something like that, because the theories that are actually considered in the practice of science are the product of a quite intricate methodology that is followed. So I think we should not only look at the possible truth or falsity of the theory, but we should also look at the way the theory has been generated by scientists, type of methodology they used. And that, in turn, leads me to correct the formula a bit. Yeah, it works. So instead of the formula that we had a moment ago, the upper formula here, I now have inserted m's, letter m, at various places. And this m stands for the method. And let's now suppose, so this is not just fourth one. Let's now suppose that the method, the scientific method, is such, the method itself, that it leads to success or probability of high probability of success or something like that. Quite regardless of whether the m is combined with t or with f or with truth or falsity. If that's the case, then of course we need. Well, then we have the possibility that I mentioned a moment ago on the previous slide, that the truth or falsity play no role. It's only the method that does it. So how could that be? Well, I think it may sound far-fetched, perhaps even ridiculous, but I don't think it's ridiculous. So the question I ask is, how could an empiricist method not only accommodate previous success, so known facts, but could also predict novel facts, the result in the novel phenomena? And I've written down an answer here. That's a proposal. It's not something that I've thought of myself. I more or less take it in the writings of Mario, but with a small twist in it. I'm saying empiricist scientists aim at an empirically adequate and heuristically fruitful theory, relying on the ideas that have proven to be empirically effective in the past, and employing a hypothetical deductive method in which they freely postulate underlying mechanisms. But that's an important point. So the empiricist I have in mind is not someone who only looks at observed facts and tries to find regularities only in terms of these observed facts. It's an empiricist. Well, look at the practice of science, whether you're an empiricist or not. You always are looking for mechanisms. But what I do not add to this statement is that these mechanisms have to be true. How could I know that they are true? The only thing that I can know is that they lead to success. So I'm not making any truth claims. So how is it that I come to that formulation? Well, it's too sophisticated to think of formulation like this myself. It comes from the writings of Mario with a small change. Because Mario also gives an explanation of my theories to make correct predictions. And it looks like, but that's from the realist point of view. And it looks like this. So how are scientists able to find a theory that could predict unexpected novel phenomena? And the realist reply, according to Mario, is this was possible because the theories, well, aim at the truth, but also deep and heuristically become truthful theory. Well, you can aim at something, but that doesn't mean that you don't succeed, of course. So you need additional flesh to this to get a clear. Point two, the realist, what is he doing? He's skillfully employing a reliable method. What is a reliable method? That's a truth-conducive method, leading to truth. We're hoping you is pretty effective. And reliable mostly to background. That's important now. It's very important because you get these things in the past and then you reach to the ideas. Important point is, of course, number two. What is this method that leads us to truth? Well, that's exactly the question that Mario asks as well. And here is the answer. So the reliable realist method. Well, one, it seeks not only descriptions of experience, but also theoretical explanations with consequences reaching beyond observable phenomena. It respects empirical constraints. Very good. Assuming the nature is simple and uniform, it reconstructs unobservable natural systems by analogy, abduction, and inductive explanation from observable ones. Now, this third point, I think, well, but that's a subject in itself. I think that's a bit simplistic, because in modern science, and I'm thinking of physics, it's not the case that the mechanisms in, let's say, quantum gravity are discovered or are postulated by means of abduction from things that you can see. But let's forget about details and people that I think that something like really is not possible both realism and empiricism. My point is repeating is that the notion of truth doesn't do any real work here. So an empiricist, think of myself, who follows these same rules without thinking that I'm getting hold of the truth. So as we used to say in grammar school long ago, the word truth here seems to be an epithet ornament. And in other context, we could also say it's a virtus glorifica. Alai of Molière. So I'm saying that this realist answer uses the word truth, but doesn't do anything with it that makes a difference for the methodology itself in the laboratory. So I'm saying that the same methodology could be followed by an empiricist and by a realist. And then, if I'm right in this, then we have the situation that I mentioned a moment ago, that the real work in all these phenomena is done by the M of method, and not by the T or the F, truth and the philosophy. Yes. So what does the situation look like? I've made an artist's impression. How well I've taken it over. On the side for 5 minutes. Taking this over. So we have two couples of fishermen. We do both. And on the left-hand side, we have the empiricist. And on the right-hand side, we have the realist fishermen. And they use tools to do their fishing, like fishing poles, fishing rods. Perhaps they use nets. I'm not represented here. And they are fishing in a pond, and the pond is full of fish. But there's only one. Speaking from the point of view of the realist, there's only one real fish. That's the one here. But the nets and the fishing rods and all the things that they use come from the same story. It's exactly the empiricist story, because the empiricist can use methodology. And so it seems to me that the odds to find something workable are on this side, assuming that the realist will fill back. Oh, I don't know how they do it, but a real realist should fill back almost all fish except this one with the invisible mark. Difficult situation here. There cannot be, if this is a correct picture, there cannot be any guarantee for the realist that he will find the truth. And on the other hand, the empiricist, whom the standards are lower, will only look at the theories that comply with certain theoretical virtues and are empirically successful. Well, but for him, then there's no need to throw back any fish. So, well, that's a thought that we also can discuss, but I have to go a bit quicker now. You could ask, is this many fish in the pond, in the water, in the lake, or so whatever? Is this a realistic picture? Well, I would say yes, because well, my experience as a physicist comes in, look at the situation in quantum mechanics. As soon as there is some problem in the theory, scientists actually do succeed in coming up with many alternatives. And so there's a whole list of alternative interpretations of quantum mechanics, and they exclude each other. So there's this well-known Bohm interpretation, which are just kind of spherical particles that interact via strange forces. But there are also other interpretations which are not particles at all. And there's an enormous list, and it's growing all the time. But as I think Enzo mentioned in his talk, think also of the situation at the frontiers, at the really border of science, quantum gravity. So many approaches which at this point at least seem to be equally good. And all having the really fanatic adherence was absolutely certain that they had hit the truth. So I would say that the situation is not artificial. So this picture of the pond with the many fish in it is not so strange. So this is my almost one last one. So this is just summing up. So what have I been arguing? I'm saying that the no-Omega argument in this probabilistic formulation is only effective if certain a priori assumptions are made about the prior probability. And then we have the realists in their bubble and the empiricists in their bubble, and no real progress can be made. And so the empiricists can rationally denied the realist arguments. So the stalemate that I noted in the beginning doesn't seem to be able to be ended by the introduction of probabilistic method. And that's almost my conclusion, but there's one remaining point which I would like to make. Because one very often hears from realists that all is good and well, but realism is the only position that's able to really explain. I explain with capitals, explain the empirical success of science, whereas empiricists cannot do so. Actually, there's an article by Mario with a title like that only realism can explain this. Well, here I have the explanation. So here it is. That's the empiricist. So the success of scientific theories is due to the fact that these theories have hit on one of the many hypotheses that are empirically equivalent to the two theoretical account. So think of all these fishes. And the empiricist says, why are all these fish equally good? Well, because if there is one true fish, they're all equivalent as far as my method is that fish with the mark. Now, Mario has expected all these things because I already found an answer in his writings to this proposal. Mario says that this is a kind of as-if account, and an as-if account doesn't explain. Because if I say, well, everything outside is as if it has rained, then that doesn't explain why things are bad. But I do not propose it as an as-if account. I just posit the mechanism that a lot of fish that I've actually caught, that comes from the ponds. So I take that and I take the mechanism. So in this comparison, that's the mechanism that my theory provides me with. And I say that this mechanism, this form of the theory, gives me the explanation of all the success of this theory. So it's not as, I'm not saying it is as if there's another theory. No, I'm using the form of the theory as it is. Now, that means, of course, that I do not think that explanations should, by definition, be true. But that harks back to what I said in the beginning, that opinions are divided. Now, the fact, what they call the factivity explanation, so that the theory must correspond to the people. So what I have in the back of my mind is a notion of explanation that does not depend on the truth of the premises. But if you do insist on the truth of the premises, then I think you should reckon with the possibility, at least, that science cannot explain. Because we cannot know whether the premises are true or not. So, I think that the empiricist is able to come up with an explanation of the theory of science. An explanation is something like this, perhaps possible. But I have no illusion that Mario will agree with what I'm saying. This is